Well, I'd like to welcome you all on the 1st of May 2026 to Chummie Place. Not only do we have garbage here, we have human excrement. Now Chummie would have been really happy with that. Yeah, because they closed the toilet over there so the homeless can't go to the toilet. You've got to understand that. Now, who was Chummie Fleming? Why is he the important radical? Why was this little laneway named after him? He was the first, he was the originator of the original May Day March in this city in 1892. 1892. Chummie Fleming was a bootmaker by trade. He had a boot shop across the road in Lygon Street, and he was what you call a recidivist activist. He was very active. He was a single man, never had any kids to hold him back. He was a reasonable orator, but he was an activist. And if you ever find yourself in the State Library like our friends from Bega, ask to see Chummie Fleming's flags, because for 50 years he would go down to the corner down where the tennis centre is and harangue one dog and two people every Sunday. And he's got two flags, liberty and whatever. He died in abject poverty in 1950 at the age of 53 in a little house here at 6 Argyle Street. So how could an independent bootmaker who was blacklisted in every factory in Melbourne own a house in Carlton, in Argyle Street? Well, that was a slum in those days. You know, these days you need 2 million to buy that house, maybe 2.5, I think. So, as I said, he was an activist, and he was about equality. But he was a man who had a lot of chutzpah, as they say. He had a lot of front. When Federation occurred on the 1st of January 1901, and there was a big party down at the the pavilion down there, Chummie Fleming gate crashed the Federation Party, and he wandered around for 2 hours, being followed by 4 detectives, harassing the rich and powerful. But they didn't want a scene, so they didn't evict him. Now Chummie, as I said, he was a bootmaker, and you've got to remember the 1890s were a particularly bad period in Melbourne. Poverty was on the increase, unemployment was very, very high. And Chummie was involved in an early unemployed workers' union that would gate crash church services on Sunday demanding bread. They'd go to Parliament House, demanding food. And eventually, the state government, because it wasn't federated in the 1890s, realised that you've got to get rid of these pesky protesters, and what they did is they gave them free land, 5 acres in the Dandenong Ranges. Land that you couldn't farm. We'll talk about that later on. So Chummie, in 1902, Lord Hopetoun, the greatest Governor-General ever this country has ever had, he resigned, not because of sexual innuendos, but he resigned, but I'll explain why. Lord Hopetoun was crossing the Yarra on the Prince's Bridge, right? Across the road from the art gallery there and the cultural centre of Melbourne, which I hope the bigger people go and see. But you need a lot of money to go inside, all right? But they will let you wander around for free, all right? Just tell them you're from Big and I sent you, and you'll have no troubles. So, poor old Chummie, right? He's really pissed off about the state of the unemployed, because there was starvation, and there are records of people actually starving in this city. So he decided to, as the governor was in his carriage with his horses, and he decided to jump on the running board of the governor's carriage. Today you get shot, obviously, as a terrorist. But the governor, he was a decent human being. He thought he was underpaid in this country, and that's why he eventually resigned. And he wanted to put it up the establishment. So they developed a friendship. The anarchist, Chummie Fleming, and the Governor-General, Lord Hopetoun. And if you look around Melbourne and Victoria and Australia, there's Hopetouns everywhere.
Hopetoun Road,
Hopetoun, the suburb, Bacchus Marsh, it goes on and on. Now, Lord Hopetoun did a number of interesting things. He donated his library to I think somewhere in North Queensland, I think Alice Springs or further north, this whole library for shearers and workers they'd come through, pick up a book, read it. When they came back a year later, they'd send it back. But getting back to this, so they developed this friendship, you know, the anarchist and the Governor General. I mean, you should have a film about this. And eventually, poor old, somehow, Lord Hopetoun took pity on poor old Chummie Fleming, you know, the outcast, the anarchist, the activist. I mean, Chummie Fleming was jailed many times. But one of the most interesting aspects was, you know, they didn't open the library here, the State Library, on a Sunday because it was the Lord's Day. So Chummie organised these rolling protests every Sunday. Eventually, he was arrested and jailed right for this. But eventually they won the campaign. There was only one problem. The working class wasn't interested in the library, and it closed 9 months later because nobody turned up after all that. So Chummie was useless. So Lord Hopetoun gave Chummie Fleming some money so he could buy a home across the road from his boot shop. Here, 6 Argyle Street. A lot of people claim that he didn't, but there's no way Chummie could have made any money. He was a good bootmaker, but you know, he gave away his work, basically. You know, he wasn't very good financially. So eventually Lord Hopetoun says to the Australian government, up yours, you don't increase my pay, I'm pissing off. So in one last gesture of defiance, he gave Chummie, a very scrupulously honest man, he gave him 6 cartons or 6 boxes of the best champagne from his cellar, a number of kegs of beer, and money to distribute to the working class, right? So a few weeks later, big news around Melbourne. You can imagine this is a slum of Fitzroy, Carlton, Richmond. Kids were dying every summer from typhoid, diphtheria, etc. So 5,000 people gathered across the road. They started punch-ups. But Chummie gave away, and there are pictures, and I've got posters here. Chummie gave away the champagne, the beer, and every married man who turned up got 5 shillings. Every single man got 2 shillings. There were a lot of married men that morning. So they got thoroughly pissed, had a riot, life goes on. Now, Chummie originated May Day in 1892, but he was a very democratic person. And in 1893, he called on radicals in Melbourne to come together to organise the next May Day. But he was a fixture at everyday May Day march until he died in 1950. The trouble was when the communists took over the May Day march in the 20s and 30s, they banned Chummie Fleming because he was an anarchist. So what Chummie used to do is, he used to start about 1 kilometre in front of the May Day march with his flags, and they would slowly overtake him. Now when he died in 1950, somebody decided we need to honour this man at the 1950 May Day gathering on the Yarra Bank, right? And they said, where's his ashes? They couldn't find his ashes. So they called the Butchers' Union, gave them a big box of ashes, right, from Trades Hall. And it was a windy day, and as you can imagine, Chummie had the last laugh as far as his Marxist mates were concerned, because all the animal ashes blew into their faces and noses and ears. And have you ever had I've had human ashes blow into my face because I threw the ashes into the wind. And it was fun. Now, but seriously, he was a very important man. He did very little writing, but he was an activist. And what he did is he tried to organise people who were on the margins. And all we can say about Chummie is, rest his soul. Now, he is the only anarchist in the history of this country that has something named after him, and that's this little Wayne. So,
and they spelt it wrong.
That's right. You tell him, Dennis. Tell him, come on.
It's a Y on the end.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, what do you expect from the city? The council would have been the Carlton Council, wouldn't it? Yeah. But there it is, Chummie place. Come here, have a beer, say hello to Chummie's spirit. I mean, what can you say? Great human being, worked for other people, was ethical, honest. That's why he died in abject poverty on a three-legged bed. So, that's all I can say. Now, the next stop will be Trade Tour. I'll be talking about an interesting period of Australian history which has been completely forgotten, especially around Anzac Day. So, any questions about young Chummie?
Do you think it was a real slum or a bit patchy?
Here?
Yeah.
Real slum.
Right here.
Where's George? Oh, you lived here in the 50s. What was it like? Oh, come on. That's no excuse, George. Yeah.
But over in Drummond Street, it wasn't so.
No. But what happened in those days, as you know, the working class lived next to their work.
Yeah. Well, there's a brief diversion, a very brief diversion you can take to that side of Argyle Square to get a view of Banks Warehouse, built in 1883, and that's a textile place.
Yeah, it's all factories all over.
But it's might be worth having a look at it.
Yeah. Next year,
it might be on its way out.
Next year, We've got a program to follow. We're all hungry for lunch.
Yeah, it's a significant site, Joe.
Yeah, all right. Well, that's okay. All right, let's move on. I'm going to turn this off. This is what you call an acknowledgement to country. The traditional anarchist flag is black or black and red. My late wife was a Indigenous person, Torres Strait Islander. She died in 2017. And about 30 years ago, she was pissed off that the anarchist movement didn't actually acknowledge the prior occupation of this land by First Nations people. So she designed this flag where she put 4 colour stripes on the black anarchist flag. Red and yellow to represent the Aboriginal people, green and blue to represent Torres Strait Islanders. So every year we do an acknowledgement to country in honour of my late wife, Ellen Jose. Now, if you are interested in pursuing her, well, not in the afterlife, but her work, if you put her name in, she was a very famous, well-known visual artist, and she's got work in most of the major galleries, public galleries in this country. Australian National Gallery, War Memorial, it just goes on and on. But you can see a lot of her work if you just put her name in. Ellen Jose, 1951 to 2017. And just in case any of you come from south of the Yarra, which I doubt, you do, David, a long way. On the 23rd of this month, which I understand is May, because it is May Day, we hold a ceremony, a flag-raising ceremony with the Bayside City Council, where we have all the school children from Bayside, whether private or public schools, submit artworks, and we give out a number of prizes to promote reconciliation, something that everybody seems to have forgotten. Now, those of you who hang around till the end, you get a poster. All right. It's the 21st century. Forget about facts, all right? Well, thanks for letting us know. Yeah, red, yellow, green, blue, black. Acknowledgement of country. Thank you. Let's move on. This is the crowd from a city of 5.5 million people. This huge crowd turned up for this May Day radical walk through the city. 1 from China, 2 from Bega, and the rest of you from Sunbury. Well, I don't even know that. So it's the outer regions where are the radical heart. Today, the CBD is full of gentrified idiots. It's only those in the outer suburbs that know what struggle is all about. Okay, great. So just to remind you, this is a monument, and you look at the votes there falling against the first referendum in 2016, the second referendum in 2017. The first one was very close. The second one wasn't, but the first one was very close, because by that time the body count was increasing rapidly, and many mothers were just against the concept of sending people overseas who didn't want actually volunteered. And most of the volunteers wanted to come back anyway when they realised what was going on. So as I said, this is one of the few, was the only memorial I know in Victoria. There could be one interstate to the anti-conscription struggle. And as I said before, over 60,000 62,000 young Australian men died in Europe. And let's not forget, we talk about Gaza and the atrocities that are occurring in Gaza today. There is an Australian War Memorial Cemetery, and we hear nothing from the Australian government regarding the desecration of that cemetery. These were Australian soldiers, volunteers who died in the battle in Palestine against the Turks.
And you hear the call for conscription today.
Yeah, well, I volunteer. I don't need to be conscripted.
No.
I can peel potatoes, can you? Yeah, well, it's only the young that you sacrifice. You know, the flower of the future. Your grandkids.
That's right, yeah.
Now, this is a recent memorial which has been established. Initially, through those who died in absence of work. In these days, where unions are under increasing pressure, it's illegal to strike in this country outside enterprise bargaining agreement period. This is one way foreign families come here and they put down a wreath and there is a ceremony to honour those men and women who go to work in the morning and never come back, and then their families have to fight compensation through a compensation system which in this state has been drastically reduced in the last 24 months to save money. Now this is Zelda Deplana. Her claim to fame is she and three other women came themselves to the arbitration court in the mid-60s asking for wage, demanding, not asking, Zelda never asked, but demanding wage parity. And here's the thing about Zelda, everybody thinks of her as a trade unionist and a feminist, but she was an anarchist. I edited a little magazine called The Anarchist for over 20 years, and she was our first subscriber. So, Zelda. She was a little bit like a modern day Chummie Fleming who we spoke about in Carlton. She was an activist first, scrupulously honest, and the women's movement here raised the money to put the statue here. You know why? Because the Melbourne City Council wouldn't allow the statue to go anywhere, so they on traceable property. We'll talk about the Melbourne City Council later on. So, you've got relatives or friends that you know have worked, died on workplaces, and not just people who died because of accident. Many people have been exposed to asbestos. We've got the tail end of the people who died from mesothelioma. There are the people in the marble industry that are now getting carcinoma of the sinuses, which is fatal. The list goes on and on. So this is a monument. We should have monuments like this around the city. Every city, not on trade or property. It should be part and parcel of us recognising and remembering these are the men and women who built this city. And they're relegated to a little spot in trades hall land. And just in case you put the Melbourne Trades Hall, the first trades hall built in the world, it opened in 1854. The second one was at Ballarat, which opened in 1856. So, now let's move on. The great thing from now on is the short distance. Right. Now, I'm taking you this, not that this is correct because it's the home of Victoria Opera, because in 1928, 1929 and 1930, this was a hive of activity. This was the home of the Majesty Club, which was named after a socialist who was murdered by the in the 1920s, because of the lack of manpower, all these young men had died, wouldn't work, they needed labour. So for the first time since the White Australia policy, me and gas, you know. They allowed all these people, you know, they allowed them to come in to do the shit work mechanics used to do, right?
My dad had
Fit, yeah. And I've done a fair bit of research about this interwar period in the anti-fascist movement, the Italian who were involved in the anti-fascist movement here. There was a lot of them. You know, they loved life. They saw the emergence of the New Guard, this fascist ideology, which Nazi Germany and fascism, it was seen as the way forward by a lot of people in the empire. In Australia, the New Guard was part of that. They had tens of thousands of members, many of them reserve soldiers who were willing to be involved in uprising. Now the trade union movement at that particular time was basically asleep. Although the communists were gaining more and more control of some of the unions, they were basically asleep. They were racist, blind, they were against the Southern Europeans arriving. And I've looked at some of the research material. Gaetano Panuzzi, European, Southern European, brackets, white, alright, honorary white. Now, these Italian anarchists, most of them socialists, were refugees. They were political refugees. They would have been imprisoned. Many of them were involved in assassination attempts against police magistrates, Mussolini himself. So when they came here, they physically intimidated the Italian fascists. Mussolini was very keen and sent out money here to Australia to encourage the Italian community, especially in North Queensland, which had about 70% of the Italian community at that point, about 25,000 children came, to encourage them to form fascist organisations in North Queensland, which were mainly organisations that did things like us, celebrated the things, did dances. So the anti-fascists felt that they were losing the battle. So what they did is they set up an office initially in Spring Street in 1927, and Francesco Camioli and Armando Bertazzoni and Francesco Fantini, they were the instigators, and they hired this huge hall. And they had parties, and they had balls, and they had alcohol, and they had music. And why did they hire the hall? Because Trades Hall was across the road. And they formed links with the more radical elements in Trades Hall to alert them to what was coming. The war that was coming, the atrocities which fascism is responsible for. And in many regards, these men were the catalysts to change the direction in which Melbourne trade unions moving the racist direction, but more importantly, it was a direction where they were, instituting fascism. Now, Francesco Fantini, and this is the tragic, Francesco Fantini one of the organisers of the Majesty a virulent anti-fascist, was in turn in London, South Australia, in 1960. Because he was Italian, and they put him in a prison camp in A, which was run by Italian fascists. Because in those days, because most men were at the front, the internment camps were run by the inmates. And so while he was leaned over to get a drink of water, he was bludgeoned to death before being turned. So every year, about 10, 15 years ago, we discovered that he bones died in an ossuary or a chapel at Murchison in Victoria. During the World War II, what happened is the Italian community, Shepparton, Ventura, Murchison, all those places, raised money to build a chapel. They brought every Italian serviceman and every internee that had died during World War II first the Sunday nearest Armistice Day. So you're welcome to come and join us, because we've been having battles with the organisers over the years, and we finally marched under a banner. No, never again, no civilian, because that's what we're heading to. We're heading to a war with our Asian neighbours, and over 15% of Italians were interned, including my uncle in Australia. The fact is that internment is part and parcel, and we're actively involved in trying to alert people that's a possibility. So, let's have police raids almost every second day. They didn't care.
Was there an inquiry into this then?
There wasn't. Well, there was a trial. The person who delivered the blow under orders, a simple man from Fremantle, his name was Bruno Cassotti. He was in charge of manslaughter because no witnesses were willing to come forward because they would be guilty. And he was sentenced to 2 years imprisonment, and then he was about 10 years later, in the early mid-1950s, he was allowed to come back to Fremantle. But he was just an instrument of a wider issue. The wider issue is there were intellectuals who were sent here by Mussolini and paid by Mussolini, mainly doctors, to provide health services for minimal cost to Italian immigrants in North Queensland. And they were the nexus of the fascist presence. I'll give you an example. When I was a little tacker a long time ago, my father used to take me into Brisbane, because I was born in Brisbane, Fortitude Valley, where they had a first coffee machine, cappuccino machine in Brisbane. And, you'd see all these men those days, and they'd be congregating and chatting. And there was this very well-dressed gentleman, Professore Castellano, Dottor Castellano. Yeah, Professor, yeah. You understand, you Maltese are basically Sicilian. So, he had a habit of dropping a corner. So it's a little tack like, keep with my son. Now, interestingly, I was talking to my sister, who's 3 years younger than me. She had the same experience. So this was his routine. But he was one of the fascist doctors who was interned. So like the Clientos, the famous Clientos of Queensland, they re-emerged as of the Italian community. Like, as you know, that after World War II, many of the people involved in the atrocities in Europe were allowed to enter here, although Asia knew their past records. Let's welcome the Mornington Peninsula Brigade, late as usual.
Yeah, I know.
Look, the Bega Brigade gets here on time, all the way from Bega, and all you got to do is come from Mornington Peninsula, and you've missed half the show.
We've done it backwards and forwards and inside out and found you here.
Well, I can't help your lack of knowledge.
Correct,
Right.
lack of navigational
See you
skills.
next year.
Thank
It's
you.
punishment, all right?
Okay.
All right. Let's move on to the next one.
Was there a prior Italian gangs?
No, just the farms. The farms. They own the farms. Yeah. If you go to Natura, it's actually there is a museum to irrigation and also to the internment camps, the German internment camps, the Japanese internment camps, the Italian internment camps, which is based on nationality. And the rich issue. So look it up first, because they've only got limited hours. They are it's a volunteer. Yeah. All right, let's move on to the next huge monument. Now, this is, come closer. This is the infamous 8-hour monument, and I'll tell you why it's infamous. Now, a lot of people in Melbourne will tell you that the Victorian stonemasons were the first people to have an 8-hour, 6-day week, right, in the world. It's a lie. I mean, we stick to facts. The Sydney stonemasons actually achieved the 8-hour day 2 weeks before them. All right? So, in 1856, Trades Hall, which had just been established, felt that we need to honour the fact that we've got working people working an 8-hour day. It was a 6-day week, right? So they started to raise money to build a monument to the 8-hour day. Over the next 50 years, money kept disappearing from their collection as trade unionists helped themselves to, enjoy the good life, as people do, when you're confronted with money. So it wasn't until 1903, 47 years later, that this monument was erected. It took them that long to make sure there was enough money for the 8-hour monument. But on a more serious note, the fact is that the trade union movement in this city was exceptionally strong. They never really cottoned on to the concept of May Day on the 1st of May, which was an initiative of the Federation of United States and Canadian Trade Unions, which designated the 1st of May as a day of international protest for the 8-hour day. And then a few years later, at the Second International, the World Radical Movement took it up as their day. Here in Australia, it was about trade unionism. And it wasn't until the 1890s that unskilled workers were welcomed into the trade union movement, because people of trades believed they were above the textile workers, which were mainly women. And let's not forget, the women textile workers were the first women's union in this country in the 1890s. Quite a radical union. And if you look at pictures of hairy men, at the turn of the century, you'll see one or two dainty little women amongst 100 hairy men. So now the representatives from the textile union. But if you look at pictures, and you can see them on the net, of the 8-hour processions in the 1890s, the various union groups, because the ACTU is the Australian Council of Trade Unions and Labour, right? You will see hundreds of small unions representing skilled and non-skilled workers marching down this street. Not a few thousand, or several hundred you see on the first day, after the 1st of May. So what happened is, when Henry Bolte became Prime Minister after the first Kane Labor government, what happened is they wanted to destroy the concept of Labor Day, because it was part of their anti-union agenda. So they decided to have this great festival, and they needed an exotic name for the festival. And Mr. Onus, who was an Aboriginal from Gembrel, was also a trade unionist who worked at Trades Hall. So they decided to approach him for an Indigenous name for the festival. And he said, Moomba. And the literal translation in his language, Moomba means up your bum. True story. Up your bum. So every time I hear about Moomba. But the thing is, the whole purpose of Moomba was to destroy the concept of celebrating the fact that you were part of an organisation which looked after your interests in the workplace. And that's what has happened. So if you go to a Moomba celebration these days, there is nothing denoting the fact that this was an exceptionally important day for Victorian workers. So just remember, Moomba, up your bum. Yes, he had his revenge. Almost 100 years later, he had his revenge. Mr. Onus. I knew his son, Lynn Onus, was a very well-known artist, Aboriginal artist. He was a friend of my late wife, and he was also an artist, and they always used to have a cackle about Moomba, because that's what it meant in their language. Okay, let's move on to something a little bit more modern, more 21st century. Now, you can ask questions. I may not know. Now, I use a saying all the time when we talk about our past. The saying is very simple. The knower cannot be unknown. It's not my original thing, but the known cannot be unknown. But if you don't know your history, you don't know your past, where everything you enjoy comes from, they will rewrite that history for you. And the unknown is a blank sheet. And what we see at every little spot we have seen, from Chummie Fleming, the anti-conscription struggle, to the Majesty Club, the 8 Hour Monument, and now to the Tunnerminnerwait Morgorhina Monument, the fact is, these were all unknown stories. And this is a monument due to the dedication and perseverance of the Anarchist Media Institute. We discovered at the beginning of the 21st century that 2 Aboriginal men, Tunnerminnerwait and Morgorhina, had been executed on this spot on the 20th of January 1842 for resisting white colonisation. 3 women who were involved in that resistance movement, Planavina, Truganini and Putirana, were acquitted. Now this was a forgotten history in this state. A few Aboriginal activists knew about it, but because these men came from Tasmania, from the northeast, that is the home of Morgorhina, commonly known as Timmy, I should say, Tunnerminnerwait, from the northwest, circular head, they had no people here to put their story. So from 2002 to 2006, we used to have a little ceremony just around here. We used to be harassed by police and security guards. I'd just like to remind you, if you are harassed today, we don't ask for permission to celebrate our history. Just remember that. Our history is not theirs. So, and in 2006, we made the decision to open up the struggle to a wider audience and form the Tunnerminnerwait and Morgorhina Commemoration Committee. And there were 7 foundation members. I hope I get this right. There was my late wife, Ellen Jose, Bill and Joy French, John O'Brien, Rick Simpson, Doug Chessman, and myself. There's only 2 left. Doug Chessman is in his 90s and myself. And then for 10 years we were involved in a struggle, not just with the Melbourne City Council. I stood as mayor, believe it or not, in my Hawaiian shirt in 2008 and 2012 to raise this issue. Right? And we also had problems with the internecine warfare between various Aboriginal groups. It's all about territory. But we fought all through that because what we did is our patron, we were very careful of choosing a patron who was the Aboriginal elder Caroline Briggs, who's still alive, because she had ancestry in Tasmania and ancestry in Victoria. Although she's now currently on the outer for a variety of reasons, I won't go into court cases and all that. The fact is that through that struggle, guess who wasn't there? Guess who wasn't there? The man with the wandering hands. Who was that man? Come on. Yeah, no, fuck, no. Come on. Our history is forgotten. Robert Doyle. Thank you, Dennis. We have one intellectual amongst this crowd of friends. Right. Robert Doyle. And Robert Doyle fought tooth and nail against this concept. But we finally won over the council in 2016. We had a national competition among Indigenous artists to create this monument. And people said, where are the Aborigines? Put their leg up in a spear. I mean, this is a postmodern monument. I think the hangman's platform. We had to fight to have their names placed on there because they wanted to use their English names. We said no. There is their story. The important thing is, every site I take you, we don't forget. And on the 20th of January every year, at midday, we have a ceremony where people from Tasmania come here to speak, to mark their death. Now the tragedy is, one of the few monuments in this country, as we saw with the anti-conscription monument, to the frontier wars. There has been no other major monument erected in this country in the last 10 years because of resistance among certain sections of the population. Total resistance, which we see on Anzac Day when we get the neo-Nazis booing, "Welcome to country." Somehow people think they're welcoming us to Australia. They're not welcoming us to Australia. They've been good hosts. They're welcoming us to the land we sit on, which is their traditional homeland. So, it's a tragedy. It took us many years of struggle, and we had to be inventive at the time of struggle, like standing in elections, challenging the mayor, staring down the RSL, because we used the slogan, "Lest we forget." That was our slogan, which is very appropriate. Lest we forget. So this is an anarchist club. 10 years time, everybody will have forgotten. But that's not important. What is important is the first major monument to the frontier wars in a large urban centre in this country. There are monuments to the Mile Creek Massacre, not at the massacre site, it's private property, but outside the massacre site. There are other ceremonies which are conducted. But what we should be seeing like this is every corner of this land is soaked with the blood of men, women and children who, unlike the Anzacs in World War I, who died fighting other people's wars, they died fighting to maintain their culture, their language, their families and their land. So lest we forget. And again, the known cannot be unknown. But if you allow it to be unknown, they will rewrite people in authority, the community at large, the media, artificial intelligence, will rewrite the story to suit their current agenda, as we're seeing with the increasing rhetoric about war, militarisation in this country. So, let's move on to the next monument.
What is the symbolic meaning of
The story is in there.
Oh,
These are old-fashioned newspaper stands. Remember the good old days? Which were never good.
I was thinking of, like public library boxes. That's what they look like.
The story is in there, and it's supposed to be, well, the artist who designed it is supposed to be like used bombs. They used again.
The opening Robert Doyle was present, and he wasn't terribly comfortable.
No, but the beauty was, we had outwitted Mr. Doyle. So what did the bastard do? He set up a memorial committee which is still in place, which vets all applications for new memorials. We wanted to do a memorial to Peter Norman, which was rejected. They wanted to do a memorial to Zelda Prano in the city, rejected. So you've got this conservative two-person committee which now decides what will be memorialised in the city. So he did have the last laugh. But what we did is we relied on direct action and a little bit of inventive politics, intellectual politics, forming alliances with the emerging Greens at that particular point in time, swapping preferences, all the usual dirty deeds. Yeah.
And that was before the wave of memorial destructions.
Yeah.
In recent years.
Yeah, that was before that. Yeah. I mean, look, destroying a memorial, to me, destroying a memorial is a 5-minute act, and it's repaired. Look at the Captain Cook Memorial in St Kilda. It's repaired.
A bit longer than 5 minutes, Joe.
What?
Yeah.
No, to destroy it. To destroy it, I mean. To rebuild it is a different story. But what I'm saying is, why not put that energy into building memorials across the state and across the country to the frontier wars?
You want to put energy into something or do something worth it?
Well, the beauty is now, thousands of people come out of the new station and they go past it. There are 42,000 students at RMIT, and occasionally somebody will call them. If you come on the 20th of January, bring some flowers. Now, we got it in 2 parts, we're still involved in a dispute. After we finish this service here at 1 p.m, we walk silently down to Queen Victoria Market, where we think 6 people were publicly executed in 1842 buried. We think we could work out the site. We forced the Melbourne City Council to change it from a pet shop into an information centre. We're now currently involved in an inter-cyanide dispute regarding who's got the authority to give us permission to do an ultrasound, non-penetrating ultrasound examination of the site. So it's gone out to the appropriate authorities, both Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal. We've got permission from the North East Mob, Northwest. We've got permission from Timmy's Cornelius Mob. On paper, we've approached the council. They said we can't do anything. They have now directed us to another group that's theoretically responsible, and I expect that they will deny because they don't. Well, they've got the authority. They're a recognised Aboriginal party. You know about RAPs, recognised Aboriginal parties? There are 45 different Aboriginal groups in this state. Although there's a treaty has been signed, and people who get money from government money from state government is funded into local governments are those that are recognised Aboriginal parties. And we find those groups that are more viable and more commercially orientated who become recognised Aboriginal parties. And of 45 groups, only 11 are recognised. So there's all these battles in the federal court, the state court, between different groups trying to get recognition. Because if you don't get recognition, you don't get any funding. If you don't get any funding, you know, the enthusiasm weakens because you can't rely ultimately on volunteers. So you did a much that's the state of affairs. So come on the 20th of January, midday, you don't have to ask for permission. Bring some flowers, we can put them at the execution site. All right, let's move on. How's lunch? That's what I'd like to know.
Oh, yes.
Well, we've got one more. We've got two more sites, but there is a little bit of a walk to the next one. It's not far. We're going to see the most spectacular financial misadventure in the history of anarchism in Melbourne. Next.
Financial misadventure.
As I've been saying, this was an anarchist initiative. The traditional anarchist flag is either black or red and black. My late wife was an Indigenous person from the Torres Strait. She was an activist and an anarchist and a visual artist. And she was pissed off with the anarchist movement because we didn't recognise the prior occupation of this continent. And 30 years ago, she designed this flag, which we use as acknowledgement to country. Not welcome, because we're not Indigenous, so we can't welcome you, but acknowledgement to country. And there are 4 stripes. It should be the other way around, I think, gentlemen. Gaz will tell you that. Can't you keep these people under control, Gaz? This is a serious ceremony. Acknowledgement to country, right? She painted 4 stripes on the traditional anarchist flag to highlight that we are on traditional lands which are occupied for over 65,000 years. The red and the yellow are the primary colours in the Aboriginal flag, which is a recognised Australian flag. The green and the blue are 2 of the primary colours in the Torres Strait Islander flag, which is a recognised Australian flag. The good thing is, if the Liberal Party wins power here, they're going to tear up the treaty, which took 6 years to formulate, and they're going to remove all these horrible welcome to countries, you know, and acknowledgements to country. But we will continue because we don't want them to write our history with their lies. Thank you. Let's move on. Now, if you look at this building, it's a 3-storey building. Now, William and David Ondra were news agents in Brunswick, Sydney Road, Brunswick, in the late 1870s. And being news agents, what that meant is they were able to get all the radical literature into Victoria. And on the 1st of May 1886, they formed Australia's first anarchist group, the Melbourne Anarchist Club, with people like Jack Andrews, Chummie Fleming, but they were the instigators. So, now David was a man who wrote books that never got anywhere. He had grand plans, and he made some money out of his news agency in Brunswick. And and he decided to invest into a working class heaven. And he got this building, rented this building, 3-story building. Down the bottom was a vegetarian restaurant because they believed in animal rights in the 1880s. The top of that was a reading room and bookshop, and on top of that was a printing outfit. Great plans, only one problem. The shop opened a week after the Depression began in the 1890s. Remember I told you the riots and food riots and that? So what do you think happened? He went bankrupt, right? He had a family of 5 kids. He went bankrupt and he took up the offer of the 5 acres of land in the Dandenong Ranges, right? And he also became the postmaster, this is David Andre, for Kilsyth.
Sassafras.
No, it wasn't Sassafras. I was up there, something from
Callista.
Callista, yeah. He became the postmaster for Callista on his little 5 acres. Now he had this beautiful book collection, which he created over 20 years of activism. But he also had a young family. To feed. Now, as luck would have it, the first thing that happened is his 5-year-old daughter was bitten by a snake and died, which was devastating. But then there were bushfires around Callista, and they were burned out, and he lost all his books. After that, he lost the plot, and in, I think, 1902, he was admitted to the Ballarat Lunatic Asylum, and he stayed there as an inpatient until 1925 when he died. His brother William was a bit more of an entrepreneur. We won't go to the shop. He opened around the corner in the 20s and 30s, a radical bookshop, but he needed a sideline in order to make a profit because nobody wanted to read Marx or Engels, or Trotsky or Malatesta. So he opened a magic shop. And those of you who are interested in Melbourne history, if you look at the history of that magic shop, it is an extraordinary history where they meld radicalism, radical action with magic. But poor old David, I only found one reference to him in the Ballarat Lunatic Asylum that said he was a kind, gentle man. So there is a lesson to be drawn. Be a bastard in life. Don't be kind and gentle. Because if you're kind and gentle, you're going to get nowhere. You're like the rest of us, Australians. They obey the law, they pay their taxes, they kowtow when necessary, they salute the flag, and what do they get? Nothing. A mortgage for the rest of their lives and a HECS debt. So, follow his brother William, don't be kind and gentle. Now let's move on. Now those of you who are interested in this anarchist movement was very strong in Melbourne. At one stage they were selling 6,000 of their monthlies called Honesty. And if you go to the State Library, you go to their website, you can see they were very advanced. They believed in animal rights, they were anti-racist, they produced stuff in Chinese, trying to get the Chinese workers, the slave workers down to Latrobe Street, and Little Bird Street, which was full of little carpenter shops that people would be paid nothing. And they were trying to organise across race lines, across nation lines. And what happens?
Ararat.
Ararat. No, it was Ballarat.
Was it?
Ballarat Lunatic, at the Bend. The Bend, it used to be called. People like you and me, that's where we belong. Unfortunately, they closed down the institutions and made people homeless. So our last stop is just up the road at the Majesty Theatre. So what does the Melbourne Anarchist Club have to do with the Majesty Theatre? Like Majesty Club, what do they do? Had to do with opera. You will find out, and then you're released to have lunch. You want a group shot? Why not? Yeah. All right. What am I doing? Would you like to come a little bit? Oh, all right. Lazy people. Would you three like to join here? You know, I've got to make some money out of this. So I've got to make some money out of this. Keep going, it's all right. I'm going to sell this to ASIO. You all look like terrorists to me. You know, I know you, mob. I've seen you before. I saw you down at the 8 Hour Monument, the Tunnerman Monument. Bloody radicals are everywhere. Thanks. Now this is the last. Oops, Joe. Be kind. Last stop before lunch. And the great thing about being part of this association, you pay for your own food and drinks. If you think you're going to get a free meal, it doesn't work that way, all right? Now, why are we at the Majesty group? Well, if you're an anarchist group in 1886, let's not forget, in 1986, which was 40 years ago, I can't believe it, when I was young, we celebrated Century. We had anarchists from around the world, Hong Kong, Iraq, South Korea. He was a terrorist, he was a Japanese, all this goes on. We celebrated now. The other things I'd like to remind you is, you're one of the few people in this city of 5.5 million people that is celebrating May Day on their first day. In the Northern Territory in Queensland, May Day is a public holiday. There has never been a public holiday for May Day in Victoria. The public holiday, as we said before, was Labor Day, which was taken over by the Baltic government. So we are one of the few, a handful of people that are actually marking the day. And although I organise a lot of things, I always celebrate on the day. Would you celebrate your birthday a week later? No. I don't. That's what I'm saying. We need to celebrate on the day. That's the important thing. When we do the Peter Norman celebration, it's on the day he won the silver medal. And he made his anti-racist statement by saying I stand. We celebrate May Day, we celebrate on the day. We celebrate French we do it on the day. You may not get as many people, it's not a weekend, but it's important to mark the day. Now, the Melbourne Anarchist Club, flushed with funds before their disaster down there at Russell Street, right, needed an office. It would be pretty impressive. And they chose the Majesty's Theatre, as you would. And the third we go along, the one that we building table, was the office, the first office in Melbourne Anarchist Club. But the great thing about history is it's always fudging. Because this isn't the original Her Majesty's Theatre. That burnt down 20 years later. This is the new Her Majesty's Theatre. So obviously they never had the printing press in the first window along the top. So all I'm saying to you is, as I keep saying, you can't unknow the known. We need to remember. If we don't celebrate, we need to remember our history. Otherwise, they write it for us. If they write it for us, we don't appear. Give an example. When we did the Tunnerman Melbourne Unit commemoration, we won the battle. Melbourne City Council had this big event organised. Guess who wasn't invited? The Tunnerman Melbourne Unit commemoration committee. So what happens when you're involved in a struggle, whether it's a public housing struggle, a union struggle? You get the Johnny-come-lately latest who've never done a day's work for that particular issue will then claim the credit. And it's important that we claim the credit for what we initiate. Otherwise, we will disappear.